Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. This video is a recent reads video, so it's a very traditional type of video on BookTube. It is a video where I'm talking about the books that I've read recently. So they cover somewhat about a month of reading, 3 weeks of reading, but I am currently reading many books at the same time. It's not that I'm reading them at the same time, but a little bit of one book, a little bit of another book, and then a bit of one book, and then, oh, I want to read something else. And I'm just hopping around like that. So that is not conducive to finishing many books, at least for me. But nevertheless, in the last 3 weeks, I think it's 3 weeks. I haven't counted. 4 weeks. I've finished a few books, so I'm going to talk about them right now. And they are rather eclectic, and I think they represent quite well what you can find on my channel. So if you're new to my channel and you don't really quite know what to expect, well, the books I'm going to present in this video are rather representative of what I read. So what are they? They are a classic, a very, very classic, in fact, the oldest book that we have that has reached us from the depths of time, and that is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then there is a Regency romance, The Nonesuch by Georgette, and then there's a historical mystery, One Corpse Too Many by Ellis, and then there's a nonfiction, and this particular nonfiction is a travel book, I guess. It's called Serpent in Paradise by Dea Birkett. I'm keeping this one last deliberately. When I read it, I was incensed. I think that's the word. There was something horrible about that book. It's been almost a month, so that's the one that I've read the longest ago. Is that a sentence? I finished this one like 3 weeks ago, so perhaps I've calmed down. I don't know. I have a bunch of post-its, but before filming this video, I have not prepared. I just grabbed the book and I'm just going to give you my impressions from what I remember from 3 weeks ago. But this may very well end up in a rant, and not a pretty one. Well, not pretty, but anyway, just stay tuned. If you like rants, stay tuned or fast forward. So the first book is going to be the Epic of Gilgamesh. This one, the Epic of Gilgamesh, this particular translation, I'm going to call it a translation. It is by N.K. Sandars. I say I'm going to call it a translation. It is not translated from the original language. The Epic of Gilgamesh. It's my 5th Gilgamesh that I'm reading in 3 years, 2 years? 2 or 3 years. 3 years, I think. I discovered Gilgamesh a bit by happenstance. I was in Toronto on my way to Stratford, and I was browsing books in BMV bookstores, in the BMV bookstore on Bloor Street in Toronto. And I didn't know what I wanted to read. It was just a whole bunch of books that were not expensive at all. And then I saw Gilgamesh. I've never read Gilgamesh. And I had recently, since joining BookTube, I discovered that I love old classics, like ancient Greek classic and ancient Roman classics, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. So I thought, well, Gilgamesh, that's the oldest that we have. Maybe I'm going to like that. And I bought 2 copies because they had various versions of Gilgamesh. So I bought one by, forgot the name, Herbert Miller, and Stephen Mitchell. And I read the one by Herbert Miller. I forgot the name, but I fell in love with it. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And then I read the one by Stephen Mitchell. And then last year I read the one by David Ferry. And then earlier this year I read the version by Sophus Hella. And now I've just read this one. So it's my 5th Gilgamesh in like 3 years. And I still love it. It is such a wonderful story. There's a reason it survived times. The Epic of Gilgamesh is an epic that was forgotten, as opposed to the Iliad and the Odyssey that were copied and copied and copied and came all the way through the centuries without ever being forgotten. The Epic of Gilgamesh was forgotten for a long time. It was rediscovered in the 19th century because it had been written down in tablets, which was the way, which was the medium on which writing was done in old Babylon, I guess. And well before that. And archaeologists rediscovered these tablets and deciphered them and found out that there was a wonderful epic poem called Gilgamesh. And I say an epic poem. There are various versions. So the most complete version we have was the one discovered in the library of Ashurbanipal, I don't know how to pronounce the name in English, in Nineveh. And so that generally is the basis for any version of Gilgamesh that we have. But the authors can choose to use other poems that were found. So some were written in Old Sumerian and were found in a different place. Some were also written in Old Akkadian but were found elsewhere. There are fragments here and fragments there. So before making a translation, the author has to decide what they will include in their story. So in this particular version, N.K. Sandars did not translate from the original Babylonian or Sumerian or whatever ancient language there was, because I don't think she speaks them. She translated based on scholarly translation in English, in French, and in German. So she used these various scholarly versions to create her own story of Gilgamesh. She decided not to follow the traditional 11 or 12 tablets. So that's the version that we found in Nineveh. That's the most complete story we have. And it was traditionally written on 11 or 12 tablets. Well, it's 12 tablets, but the 12th one is considered not to be part of the canon 11 tablets because the content of the story doesn't match whatever is written previously. So basically a character who died in tablet 4 or 5 is alive in tablet 12, so it doesn't make sense. So generally it's considered not to be part of the basic epic of Gilgamesh. So anyway, the author here decided not to follow this traditional division. So it is in 7 chapters and it is written in prose, which makes for a very, very lively story. Also, whenever Gilgamesh is translated, the author has to decide what to do with the repetitions, because there are long parts that are repeated in Gilgamesh. Apparently, if you read the original, I say apparently because I haven't read it. I do not read this type of language. I have no knowledge about these languages. But there are repetitions, like long passages that are just repeated 2 times, 3 times, sometimes almost back to back. And for modern readers, it can be a bit jarring. At the time, it can be supposed that either the poem was sung or that at least it was recited, that it was declaimed in front of a public. And repetition is a tool to get attention. If you think of songs, they have choruses, that just 4 lines that keep coming back over and over and over. So it was a bit the same with the epic poetries, we can think. But the question is what to do with them when you translate for a modern audience of readers. And she chose to remove most of them. She kept some of them, actually more suggested some of them. She kept them really to a minimum. So that makes a story that is very readable. So if you have never read Gilgamesh and you are a bit intimidated by ancient classics, I would recommend this one, The Epic of Gilgamesh in prose, so the Penguin version by N.K. Sandars. It would be an excellent introduction. There is another Penguin Classics, Black Penguin Classics of Gilgamesh, but one that is much thicker. So this one is rather thin. There's an introduction of about 60 pages, 60, 70 pages. There's a map, which is always nice. And then there's the poem, which is not a poem, it's a novel, I guess, of about 60 pages too. And at the end, there's a glossary of terms, of names. So if you forgot who Endukuga is, it is a Sumerian god living in the underworld. So if you forgot who that name was, well, you can check it up in the glossary. So this one was absolutely, totally wonderful. Next is another absolutely, totally wonderful book, but in a very, very different way. It is The Nonesuch by Georgette, originally published in 1969. So we are jumping ahead by about 4 millenniums. So in 1962, did I say 69? 62. And so this is an omnibus, and I decided to read the 3rd one, which is The Nonesuch. Some of Georgette Heyer's novels don't age particularly well. Either you will find ugly bouts of anti-Semitism, or you will find males mistreating females, grabbing perhaps before they're really allowed, treating women like possessions, or very often you will see romance between cousins, which nowadays is a bit frowned upon. In The Nonesuch, you have none of these things. It's one of the Heyer's novels that aged the best, I think. We have our main character, who is called the Nonesuch. So he is a man who is perfect, I guess. He is very rich, very handsome. He excels at every sport. He's super well dressed. He has exquisite manners. He dances very well. And he finances orphanages. He opens schools for orphans. The man is perfect. And at the beginning of the book, he inherits a property from an old uncle, cousin. We don't know exactly what's the relation. And he inherits this property in the north, in Yorkshire. And he goes there with another cousin who did not inherit, but it's a cousin who is rather younger than him. So the Nonesuch is about 35, and his cousin, Lord something. So the Nonesuch is not a nobleman. He's just Sir Waldo. Only a baronet. Ew, that's his biggest fault. His cousin is a lord. I forgot his name. Lawrence. His name is Lawrence. And they go to the north to look at this property that has been decrepit, and the Nonesuch decides to put it back in shape because he's thinking that could be a good school for orphans. And while they are there, they are meeting young ladies. There's one in particular who lives not very far, and it's the cousin Lawrence who sort of falls for her. She's so beautiful, but she has a bit of a fiery temper. So the older cousin decides to stay a little bit longer to keep an eye on his younger cousin to make sure that everything's just fine. Because the young lady in question is 17. She's not out yet officially, so she has a governess/companion with her. And this is a novel, I would say, very much in line with Jane Austen, in the sense that most of the activities are discussions in drawing rooms and balls and rides in the country. There's nothing of the modern Regency romance, so there's no mystery to go with it. There's no I don't know, bedroom antics. There's no independent woman of fortune who wants to make her path through life. Though there's a woman who's rather independent. She decided to earn a living, but it's in line with what could be expected at the Regency period. It's not something that is directly taken from the 20th or the 21st century and plucked back in Regency England. So it's absolutely delightful. I loved it. I just really had a good time. I think it's going to be one of my favorite Heyer novels. So that was fun. Next we have One Corpse Too Many by Ellis Peters. So this is a mystery that is set in 12th century England during the Civil War between King Stephen and Empress Matilda. How can they both be king and empress at the same time? Well, that explains the Civil War. The Civil War actually reaches Shrewsbury, which is where our action is. The action takes place. The city is under siege at the very beginning of the book, and it has been under siege for a little while. Our detective is Brother Cadfael, who lives in the abbey just outside the city. So they are not under siege. They are doing just fine, but when the King Stephen decides that the city has resisted long enough and he decides to take the city, it leads to many people being executed. And the monks of the abbey, including Brother Cadfael, who had a life before joining the abbey. He was a soldier. He took part in the Crusades. Perhaps he was a bit of a pirate too. He has seen a lot, and he is the herbalist. He's a bit of a doctor. He's a man who knows a lot. And he is one of the people who has to take care of the bodies. And he counts the corpses, and he realizes that there is one too many. And then he looks at it closer, and he can see that this person was murdered. That person was not hanged like the other who were executed. That person was strangled. It's not the same thing. So he investigates. And in this particular, so this is the second in the series. I have to say that for the mystery part, I figured it out rather quickly. The whodunit part, I figured out relatively quickly because the number of suspects was rather limited. One of them was ruled out quickly, which left two other ones, and and one of them is a character that becomes the sidekick in the other novels after that, so I knew it wasn't him. So it left really just one possibility. And then the question was why and how. So even though I knew who did it, it nevertheless remained super interesting. And I just love the atmosphere of these mysteries. I think the author renders the Middle Ages very well, and it's not always the most dream-like aspects of Middle Ages. Like I said, a whole bunch of people were executed. We don't see the looting of the city and the pillaging. We don't really see that. I think the author holds back. She makes King Stephen perhaps a little bit better than he was, a little kinder than he was, decides not to include that in her book because nobody would read it. That's not the atmosphere of the book. But nevertheless, I loved the atmosphere of Brother Catfall. Is it the 10th that I'm reading? No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's the 8th that I'm reading, even though it's just the second in the series. And I love them all. They're all good. So I love that one. For the last book, it's going to be a rant, and I'm filming this a second time because while editing, I realized that my ranting was disheveled and not very coherent. Well, it was coherent. Now, I'm not saying that I was rambling, but I started some ideas without really finishing them. So now that I've sort of ranted the first time, perhaps I'm going to be a bit more organized the second time. So I'm refilming this and just plucking it at the end of this, the previous video. So, Serpent in Paradise by Dea Birkett. This was published in 1997. I found this book in a used bookstore. I just read the cover quickly and it just sounded fascinating. In 1979, the crew of the Bounty mutinied, cast Captain William Bligh adrift, and sailed into the South Pacific. They landed on Pitcairn Island, a tiny rock 1 mile wide, 3,000 miles from the nearest landmass. Their 38 descendants are still living there. No one has trespassed there until now. Oh my God, that's fantastic. Especially given that I want to read around the world in nonfiction. So at the beginning of the year, I made a video about my idea of reading around the world, like one nonfiction book per country, but country not necessarily being the only unit of measurement. So for example, Pitcairn, it is not a country, but I've never read anything about Pitcairn. So I'm just discovering Pitcairn through that book. I say this is going to be a rant, and this is going to be a special rant. Because I think for the first time since I've joined BookTube, certainly, and I think in my entire life, I don't like a book, not because of the book, but because of the author, of the way the author behaved in the book. Because this is a memoir, it's a travel memoir. It left a very bad taste in my mouth. I have something against the author. Her actions, not herself, I don't know who she is, but what she did, according to herself, according to this book, is terrible. In my opinion, terrible. She didn't kill anyone, but yeah. Let's continue. So the author, Dea Birkett, is from the United Kingdom. This book was published in 1997. So the author became fascinated by Pitcairn after seeing a movie about the mutiny on the Bounty. So there are several movies, but the one that she saw was the one in the mid-1990s or early 1990s with Mel Gibson in the role of Captain Bligh. She became absolutely fascinated by Pitcairn, and she decided that she wanted to go there. She just wanted to go there so bad. So she actually took the means to get there. Now it's complicated to get to Pitcairn. As it says on the cover, it's 3,000 miles away from any landmass. And not just that, there is no regular communication with Pitcairn, particularly in the 1990s. On the cover here, it says that the descendants of the that Pitcairn has no cars, no crime, no doctor, and no regular contact with the outside world. Now, this was 1997, so I figured, well, perhaps it's not true anymore with the internet and all of that. So I Googled a little bit, and effectively, they now have a bit more contact, like electronic contact with the world, but the part no crime isn't true. A few years after the stay of the author on the island, there was a woman that came forward and accused one man or several men of having abused her, and then more women came out to say that they had been sexually abused by men on the island, and sometimes while they were well under 18, while they were under 12. And then one of the accused men gave the excuse that, well, the age of consent is 12, but it's as though the notion of individual consent was not really there on the island, that as soon as the girl was 12, she was fair game, whether she liked it or not. Anyway, so that's not in the book because that came afterwards. But anyway, I had read about it a little bit, so I had a few names and I knew a little bit, but so that's not entirely true. So the book already is outdated in that sense, that presenting the society as having no crime is absolutely untrue. So anyway, the author became absolutely fascinated with the island. She wanted to get there. So to get there are several complications. So the first one being that there is no regular contact with the outside world. You cannot land there on a plane. The island is actually too small to have an airport. It's 1 mile wide by 1.5 miles long. That's small, and it's all craggly, and there's not enough flat surface to have a landing strip, and anyway, it's too far away for any plane just to get there. It could get there on a one-way, but then it couldn't refuel to go back, so it's just airplanes are out of the question. And then as for ships, it's not an island that is easy to approach. However, it is on the shipping line to New Zealand, between the Canal of Panama and New Zealand. So ships that are going through Panama and going to New Zealand are going not that far away from Pitcairn. So if the captain has a bit of time, they can do a small detour and drop somebody off Pitcairn Island. So that's what the author does. She tries to find before that, she tries to find a way to get there. She met she contacted a lot of people who were interested in Pitcairn, like this Pitcairn Society and I don't know what, people in England, in London, or in Britain in general, who are interested by Pitcairn for one reason or another. Sometimes it's for the stamps, because apparently the stamps from Pitcairn are very valuable, and the stamps are going to be to play a role in there. But at one of these places, she met a man who said that he had actually visited Pitcairn, that he has a yacht, and he went close by, and on his massive big yacht, he has how do you call them, ultra léger, super light, I don't know, ultralight airplane, and just basically it's a small motor and it's just being carried by the wind, and that he landed there and that he spent some wonderful time there. And he tells her, I'm going to take you. But however, when it was time to plan for the trip to go there, he said something came up, the yacht is being repaired, and after that I'll have to go elsewhere, so I cannot take you to Pitcairn, sorry, we'll have to postpone. So she finds another way to get there. So the other way that she finds is that she finds a place on a shipping, on a ship that is taking fuel from Houston to Houston, Texas, so through the Gulf of Mexico and then the Canal of Panama, and then all the way to New Zealand. So that is a Norwegian ship, and they have accepted to take her in. She has worked on ships before, so she's not a stranger to that world. She knows how it works. She can do her share while she's on the ship. So she's not a passenger that is difficult to satisfy. So it's they accept to take her. Second thing that you need is, once you get there, you need a place to stay. She managed to contact someone on the island. They have a radio, and I don't know exactly how it works, but you can sort of relay a call to another one and just connect people through the radio. And she could have contact with somebody in England, was a massive radio enthusiast, and he had just a massive antenna, and he could reach Pitcairn in one way or another. And she managed to get a room somewhere. So her hostess was ready to accept her. Her son was building a house a little farther away. He's an adult. He's like 30 something years old. And he was building a house a bit farther away. So she had a room available. If she wanted to stay, it would be $100 New Zealand dollars a month. So she's like, yeah, absolutely wonderful, I'm taking it. And the third thing that she needed to get to Pitcairn is actually a permit to land. Because you cannot just show up in Pitcairn. You have to get a permit to land. So she wrote a letter to the council delivering these permits, trying to make a case to say, why should I be accepted on Pitcairn? And it's far from everyone who is accepted. They refuse a lot of people because they're a small place, so any person who is added to this tiny society of like 40, 50 people will have an impact, and the person cannot just go back in one day. So you have to think about it before you welcome someone. And she wrote a letter, and she had to find a reason to get there, because just saying, oh, I saw the movie and it's fascinating and I want to go to Pitcairn because of Mel Gibson, you cannot write that. So she found the excuse was the stamps. She decided that she would research the postal system of Pitcairn and its particularities and how it worked and all of that. She even managed to get a grant from the Royal Mail that would finance a part of her trip there, so that she could write articles about the mail. And in her letter, she also adds, and she says, I don't know why I wrote that. So that's what she writes at the beginning, that she is 36, if I remember correctly, single and no husband. Single, like no husband and no children. Basically, I'm available. Yeah, I'm available. That's not what she wrote. She says, I don't know why I wrote that, but just keep that in mind. So anyway, she gets her permit and she gets there. So once she gets there, the hostess is a woman of a certain age. She's 70 something years old. And she says, well, you know, the $100 New Zealand, I don't really need that. What I really need is somebody to help me. I'm not getting any younger. So I would like you, if you could, cook and do the cleaning and help with the physical tasks, and especially go on the canoes and trade, because that is something I cannot do anymore. The way they live on Pitcairn is that they live from agriculture, so whatever they can grow breadfruit, they can grow papaya, they can grow yams and sweet potatoes, they can grow a whole bunch of stuff, oranges, so a lot of tropical fruits, because they are in the South Pacific, so they can grow quite a bit of stuff. However, the island is small, so it's limited in the number of things that they can actually grow. They live from fishing also, and all the rest they get through trade. There's very little money coming in, like cash. The only cash that comes in is from the stamps that they sell, and they are apparently very much in demand, so they make quite a bit of money from the stamps. It's basically their only income. And the rest they get by trade. So whenever a ship is coming by, they make contact with it, because the ship, it's on the line between the Panama Canal and New Zealand, but the ship has to make a little bit of a detour. It's like a 100-kilometer detour. It's not enormous, but at the same time, it is. So if the ship is it's like already late, or they will not stop, but sometimes they stop. And they stop, but then they cannot get straight to the island. So they the Pitcairners take canoes and go to the boat, go to the ship and just throw rope and just board the ship like pirates almost, and they trade. So fresh fruit, because when you're on the ship, sometimes you don't necessarily have fresh fruit, against some modern commodities. And on the island, they have all the modern commodities. They have they have electricity that is created through generators. So they have stoves, they have microwaves, they have all the little electrical apparatus that you can have. They have VCRs. This is the 1990s, so I suppose nowadays they would have, I don't know, the CD player, the DVD players, or Blu-rays, or whatever. Well, no, I suppose it's all electronic now. But they had all the modernities that they all got through trading. They can also buy stuff, so they do get a bit of cash that they can buy stuff, but then the delivery is not easy, because there is a supply ship coming in, but it's coming in like every 2 months, something like that, 3 months, and sometimes it just misses. Sometimes it just doesn't come because of the weather, because of one reason or another. So they are very, very isolated. So the author stays there in that house and makes tries to find a place on this teeny tiny island, and in this teeny tiny society of about 4 dozen people. So her excuse was to investigate the Royal Mail, to research to research the mail on Pitcairn. It's not royal. Well, technically, I suppose it is, because Pitcairn is a colony from Britain. It just belongs to Britain. It's a colony. It's not an independent country, so it's somewhat a colony of Britain. But at the same time, Britain doesn't really care about what is done on Pitcairn. So meh. So that's the excuse. And she's not even herself particularly convinced by the excuse. And she says rather early on in the book that even the inhabitants of the place quickly realize, like they see through her, that she doesn't really care about the male, that she just wanted to go to Pitcairn. And I think the reason why they let her come was because of that particular line. I am single and no children and I'm in my 30s. That is an asset for an island that is teeny tiny, a woman who can bear children. So I think also that's the reason why the hostess offered her a room, because she had a son who was about that age, and she thought, well, perhaps, maybe. And I think the author also thought, well, perhaps, maybe, because throughout the book, she complains that the people of Pitcairn keep a distance. They are not completely honest with her. They are not entirely welcoming. They are nice to her. They talk to her. She's not ostracized or isolated or anything, but she feels like there's a bit of a distance between them and her, and that she's not entirely welcome. And I'm thinking, why did you expect that? You're leaving anyway. Why should they open up completely? So now I know that it's perhaps maybe she was thinking that she would stay. She never says that in the book. She never admits that. But that's the only conclusion you can have after reading the book. And then so she stays there for a little while. She gets along very well with the son, who lives elsewhere, doesn't necessarily live in the house. He's very often in the house with his parents, but he's not necessarily there all the time. He's building his own house, which is... She talks a bit about the way the house is built is basically as the materials arrive, the house is being built. So it's a house that has doors, but it doesn't have any walls because the doors arrived before the walls. So they placed the doors, but there are no walls. So it's just, yeah, that's the way it goes. And so anyway, so she gets along well with the son, but there are no sparks flying, so she's not really interested. However, she's interested in someone else. That someone else is married. That someone else's wife is in New Zealand. I think she's somewhere else. She's not on the island with the children. So they have, I think, 2 children, and the children are also with with their mother. So they're not on the island. But they're going to come back at some point. And at least the man is convinced that they're going to come back. And as far as I know, they're supposed to come back. But the author sort of feels a kinship with that man, that he's a bit of an outsider too, and they should share something and all of that. At some point, there's a party. There's a party with a lot of people at the men's house. The other people leave. She's the only one left. She comes back at 5:30 in the morning. She has an affair with the men. She writes in the book. And then she realizes that everyone knows about it. And she's surprised. It's an island that is 1 mile wide by 1.5 miles long. There's a village in the middle. You cannot be any farther away than 1/2 mile from home. I don't care how discreet you are. You have no privacy. Everybody knows that you were the last one to leave the party. Your hostess knows you came back at 5:30. 1 + 1 = 2. You're not allowed to be surprised. However, she never adds 1 + 1 = 2. Someone must have spied on us. Someone gossiped. And she decides to blame someone. She blames someone in the book, a friend of the son of the house, who comes in and out and is very discreet and rarely talks, and is just, when he walks he's very, very silent. She never hears him come. He must have spied on us. And I wrote at that point, how dumb is she? It's obvious that she was the last one to leave the party, and the host heard her come back at 5:30 in the morning. That's it. That's it. You don't need anything more. So, and that's the other thing. She was offended that everyone knew about that everyone learned about it, that there was no private life. And she also knew that she knew a lot of stuff about a lot of people, because she gives names, and she gives real names. And we know pretty much everything about everyone on that island. And after that affair, she's offended that she has no privacy. And she realizes that for the people of Pitcairn, The privacy, the boundaries of privacy are not the person. It's not even the family. It's the island. There's this sort of ring of privacy around the island. And she's saying, oh, that's how they protect themselves. What does she do with that ring of privacy? She gives it the middle finger. It's all in the book. I can read about all of that. So at that time, she sort of realizes that she has overstayed her welcome. Because well before that point, I was starting to think, okay, what are you doing there? You're not there for the male system. What are you there for? And the people, they sort of realize that, okay, well, what are you going to do? What are you doing here? And she said, oh, well, I'm a writer. I'm just going to write about my stay. And the people told her, well, we don't really like writers on Pitcairn. And I can understand why. After having read that book, I can understand why they don't like writers. When she left, okay, before she left the island, so she had no inkling of thinking of leaving the island. It's just after the affair, when everybody gave her the cold shoulder and clearly judged her for having slept with a married man and thinking her that she was not particularly nice, particularly given that everyone had thought that she was coming here with the intention of perhaps, maybe, why not, marrying the son of the hostess. So she sort of thought, okay, perhaps maybe, she didn't even think perhaps maybe I should leave. It just so happened that not long after that, a captain from the same shipping company that had left her on the island called through the radio and say, we're coming near the island. Is the person that was dropped like 6 months ago, I don't even remember, a few months ago, would that person be interested in having a way out of the island? And then she thought, oh, well, I struggled, but I sort of knew I had to accept it. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Get out of there. You overstayed your welcome. So she took the offer and decided to leave. And the hostess said, would you mind taking a letter to the person in England that had connected them? So the guy in England that had the radio and that had radio contacts with Pitcairn. Would you mind taking a letter to him from me? And she said, no, I'd love to. So she takes the letter. And she takes it to, she doesn't open it. She just gives, I forgot the name of the woman, but the hostess has a letter for you from Pitcairn. Oh, and the guy's all happy. So he reads the letter and then he calls the author. She tells me that you had an affair with a married man. Is that true? She has a boyfriend. She's not married, but she has a boyfriend. And she says to the man from the radio, oh no, it's just a small island. They like to gossip. It's not true. Because she gets to decide when to reveal her affair. So I suppose she's not with her boyfriend anymore, or she came clean with it, or I don't know what. But she decides to write in the book that she had an affair. But she chose the moment when she decided to do that. Did she have the same courtesy for the married man with whom she had an affair on the island? Absolutely not. She wrote for the entire world to see that this man cheated on his wife. For the entire world and all of the people of Pitcairn. Did she think that the story would never reach Pitcairn? I'm sure it has. It's guaranteed it has. At least it has reached the wife. How can it not? So, the reason why I'm angry with the woman, it's not so much that she had an affair. I mean, it's her business. I don't judge for that. It's the fact that she betrayed the people of Pitcairn. She knew that there was this privacy ring around it, and she decides that it's not important to them. She went to Pitcairn with some sort of ridiculous idea of, I don't know, paradise. I think that's the idea. And I think somewhere, consciously or not, she thought she would, I don't know, have some sort of fantasy romance with a man there and find heaven. I don't know what she had in mind. But the result is that she used the people of Pitcairn. That's the result. She used them to further her writing career, her travel writer credits. I don't know what she did. What's the purpose of that? But that's what she did. She used the people of Pitcairn. She went there not really knowing why, and she took everything that she could from her stay, and she brought nothing to Pitcairn. What did her stay bring to the people of Pitcairn? I'm not talking about material stuff. What did her presence bring to the people of Pitcairn? Absolutely nothing. She did not improve the situation. She did not bring anything. She just made matters worse for at least one person, maybe more. It's just, yeah, with such a small society, it doesn't take a lot to disturb the people. So it's just, I really do not like the actions of the author and the fact that she wrote about it. I understand that if you go to Pitcairn, it costs quite a bit of money, and I suppose you have to make money out of it. But she could have written a different book. She could have written a different book, and she did not. She decided to write about that. So yeah, that's my opinion of the book. And that's the thing. The book is good. I'm very invested in it, as you can see. The way she portrays the society, the people, the way of living, it's just fascinating. But the author's actions, it's just, ugh. That's the best criticism I can have of it. It's ugh. I don't know how to spell that on Goodreads. Ugh. And yeah, so, also, when she came back to England, she decided to contact her friend Tim to share experiences. However, while she was on the island, she found a registry of all the people who ever came on the island. So what it says here on the cover, like nobody ever came on the island, that's bullshit. From the content of the book itself, a lot of people went on the island. It's not regular. It's not as though that there's a ship of 2,000 people coming there every day. But there's plenty of people who have gone to Pitcairn over 200 years. So it's not true that no one has trespassed there. Yeah, that's not true. But anyway, so there's this book with all the people who have been there, and she doesn't find the name of her friend Tim. So when she goes back, she decides to contact him and to talk about him. Say, hey, I've been to Pitcairn. And so she dials the number and says, oh, Tim. The person says, hello. Hi, Tim, it's Dee. I went to Pitcairn. And the voice on the other side of the phone says, oh, this is not Tim. This is his brother. Tim is away. And she's like, what? No, you're Tim. And then just hangs up. And she sort of realizes that, oh, Tim lied to me. He never went to Pitcairn. Yeah, it says, the absence of any record of Tim's visit in Jay's book. The fact that no one on Pitcairn could remember having seen a microlight flying from Taro Round. And now Tim's refusal to speak to me on the phone. Perhaps he had never been to Pitcairn. She's still at perhaps. What I wrote in the margin was, well, obviously, how dumb is she? That's how angry I was at her at that point. And it's a shame that she's so stupid on that aspect, and well, the aspect of Tim is rather insignificant, but the betrayal, it's a shame that she did that, because she has some clever, I guess, observations. And one thing, she thought about how isolated it was and how much like a prison it felt, this island sometimes. And she writes towards the very end, I imagined how a court case would be conducted on Pitcairn. What if someone was murdered, stabbed, allowed to lie where they had fallen? What if someone pushed me off the cliff down rope? That could have happened. She could have been pushed off a cliff. They would have said, well, she fell, and nobody would have known. Even if the crime was committed in front of a crowd, who would bear witness against another Pitcairner? Who would stand up and accuse? Who would defend, cross-examine, and judge? Perhaps the Pitcairn Islands administration in New Zealand could bring in someone from outside to conduct an impartial inquiry and establish the facts. But who could refute the tale that I had tripped and fell? Accidents were common in Pitcairn. And a bit later she writes that what would be the punishment anyway when the island is already a prison? And she has a point. I don't remember what I said at the beginning, because as I said, this is the second time I'm filming, so I don't remember if I said it in the first video or if I said it in this version. But I'm going to repeat it anyway. So a few years after the author went there was a woman who accused men of having raped her and assaulted her. And that's exactly what happened. A judge was sent from New Zealand, and not just a judge, but a whole little tribunal was sent to Pitcairn to judge the men who were accused of that. And that's the number of men who were accused. I think it was 7. So that was half the adult male population of Pitcairn. And the island being a place where physical force is still important. To survive there, you need a certain amount of physical strength. To go on, like, to man the canoes, they are big canoes. They're not little kayaks that you can sort of paddle your way. It has to be able to sustain the Pacific Ocean. So they go to get their wood on a different island that is a few miles away. So it's not a day trip. They have to spend the night there. So you need quite a few men to handle the canoe, and once you get to the island, you need strength to cut the trees, and then to take it back, and then to chop the wood. You also need strength to maintain even if it's just dirt road, they still have to be maintained. You need a certain amount of strength for the agricultural work. Yes, they have somewhat modern tools, but at the same time, you can run out of fuel at any time. So you still need some strength to work. Same thing for fishing, same thing for when they go on canoes to trade with the ships. So you need men. So removing from society, just sending to prison in New Zealand, let's say 6 men, it would punish not just the 6 men, it would punish the entire island. So they had to come up with different ways. So basically they were suspended sentences. And I think the biggest punishment for the men was to be denounced. Suddenly they could not be these exemplary men. However, several of the men sort of, even if they were condemned, they sort of refused to admit that they did anything wrong. They say, well, the age of consent is 12. That's it. Whether the girl consented or not, it didn't really matter. Well, she enjoyed it. The age of consent is 12. That's it. So anyway, so she had some insightful observations about the island. She also has a couple of stupid ones. At some point, she goes to the church. So the religion on the island is Seventh-day Adventist. So at first they were Anglicans because the only Bible they had was the Bible from the ship, and they would read from it. And the main mutineer would sort of read from the Bible and hold services as though they were on the ship. So it was the same discipline as if it was on a ship. And then at some point in the 19th century, there was a missionary from the Seventh-day Adventists who came and converted the island. So the island is a Seventh-day Adventist religion. And at some point she says, I admire the faith that the Pitcairners have. As though all the Pitcairners have faith, and I believe in it a lot. The church, whenever she goes to church, there's at most 10 people, and on an island of 40 people or 50 people, so that's like 25% at most. So you cannot say that all the Pitcairners have faith if you don't see more than a quarter of the population in church. So that was a bit stupid, but she has some interesting observations about the island. And it was an interesting book. I enjoyed reading it, but I enjoyed learning about Pitcairn. But at the same time, as I said, it leaves a very bad impression. The author's behavior leaves a very bad impression, and I don't know how to rate the book, because there's nothing wrong with the book. There's something wrong with the author's actions. There's something wrong with the fact that the author decided to write the book in the way that she has, that she decided to use the people of Pitcairn to write the book. That's what's wrong with the book. It's not the way it's written. It's not it's the content. It's not the manner in which the content is presented. It's the fact that the author used the people of Pitcairn. Okay, that's it. That's my rant. I'm not filming another one. I think it's coherent enough. And I'm just going to add that at the end of the video. So this is the end of the video. So thank you everyone for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will see you in the next one. À la prochaine!